Well, for those of us who've been around long enough to remember it, that was a little bit more like the old Montreal Canadian Grand Prix when the race used to be held at the end of the year. Always wet, or usually wet, but also very cold. Not cold on this occasion, but a bit of a washout on this Friday for the Canadian Grand Prix. First session was on and off showers, cars dodging in and out of the pit lane. Practice started 20 minutes late because the pit lane was closed while they cleaned up some of the standing water, and not too many conclusions therefore could be drawn. Everybody hoping, of course, that there would be a dry slot in FP2. There was right at the beginning a bit of a queue in the pit lane getting out, and then the track dried out almost to the point where it was a dry line all the way around the lap. Not in every sector, but certainly sector 1 looked pretty good, but under the trees still a little bit damp offline. So that needs to be borne in mind in any results that we look at and analyse. And then the rain came. A few incidents. Guanyu Zhou went off at the beginning of FP1 basically on his first lap, aquaplaned into the guardrail. On that quick section after the first chicane, just lost the back end, hit the guardrail on the left, bit of damage to the suspension, got out for the second session. Also drama for Charles Leclerc, who was out on intermediates at the beginning of FP2. And again, you'd think, well, yeah, and it was a little bit dodgy, the weather, everybody wondering how wet it was going to be, send him out on intermediates. But of course, the session at that point, I say of course, but the reality is the session at that point hadn't officially been declared by the FIA to be a wet session. And when it is declared a wet session, you can go on intermediates. And the offshoot of that is that you can then take a set of tyres into FP3. But because that declaration had not been made at that point, and Charles was out on the intermediates as I speak, that's being investigated. And he may get a penalty for that. Not a great thing, and we've been saying what a great job his new race engineer has been doing. He won't be too happy with that one. And it was a bit funny actually when the order was given for Charles to box immediately. He was out on his intermediates and he didn't know what the problem was, and they didn't want to say on air what the problem was. Bit embarrassing, of course. And Charles kept saying, as he came into the pit lane, he said, well, if there's something wrong with the car, tell me to slow down. No, just box, Charles, just box. And that was the end of it. But it is a bit of an issue, that one, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of penalty he gets. Probably be a rap on the knuckles, but we'll see. The other teams may not accept a rap on the knuckles, I think, but we'll have a look and see what happens there. And the other thing was that it wasn't a great day for Max Verstappen, but bearing in mind it was basically wet all afternoon, except for that one dry period at the beginning of FP2. Yeah, if you're going to have problems with the car, have it on a day like that when it doesn't really matter at all. There was no way they were ever going to get out and do any sort of long runs, get any homework done, or indeed really do any comparisons in terms of top speeds through the traps or anything like that. Max, whenever he was out, and didn't do that many laps anyway, whenever he's out, he's always in the top 3 or 4, but he never really got out there and got into a groove of a number of flying laps, getting the tyres right up to temperature. And he came in early on his run when the track was relatively dry in FP2, saying there was an odd smell from the car, a burning smell, and to get the fans on the car straight away. And sure enough, the car was then up on stands in the garage where they were taking various bits and bobs. Looks like the right rear brake drum again was one of the central points of interest. Bear in mind, of course, he had that huge brake failure during the Australian Grand Prix. Not saying it was the same thing. At the moment, Red Bull doing a very good job of just having everybody who wasn't working standing in front of the garage to make sure nobody could see what was going on, or indeed see the famous flaw. So, yeah, a bit of a question mark there. But as I say, if you're going to have a bad day, have it on a day like this on the Friday in Canada when it didn't really matter. Anyway, I say that, of course, there were some drivers out there who put in a lot of laps, who would have enjoyed the conditions. One of those, sadly, was not Jack Doohan, who has been given a run in the Esteban Ocon Alpine in FP1, and they didn't send him out at all until right at the end, and then he just came in, didn't do a flying lap. Bit of a shame, really, when you've got a young gun like that, particularly with Jack's car control. It would have been kind of nice to have seen him out in the wet, throwing the car around a bit. Isn't that what the young drivers are supposed to be there for? Anyway, oh no, dangerous. Better not do that. Better keep the car in one piece, whatever. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the results, some of the data from the day. FP1, the track was damp, but they got up to reasonably representative trap speeds. The trap on this occasion is, I'm pleased to say, in a decent place, i.e. at the end of the long straight before the final chicane, exactly where the speed trap should be. So it is representative of what the cars are going to be doing through the air. And this was the only time, I think, when they were running full dry settings. Not all of them running dry settings, but some of them would have been. They're out on soft tyres. And so you can read a little bit into that. I think the only thing you can say are the trends are that the out the Visa Cash App. I was about to say AlphaTauri. What am I thinking? The Visa Cash App specials look very quick in a straight line, and that was reflected in FP2 as well. Yuki was quickest in FP1 through the trap. The Ferraris, pretty good. Charles Leclerc, as he got out on the circuit, was just pushing hard, looked aggressive and running a bit wide at hairpins, locking up under chicane, braking on his opening laps, things like that. But looked like a guy who just won the Monaco Grand Prix and realised that he's got a real chance in the championship, and just out there confident as anything. Max 324, can't read much into that. Just wouldn't know how much front flat they're running, what sort of downforce they're running in terms of setting the car up for the wet. But again, Daniel Ricciardo underlining the speed of that Visa Cash App car this weekend with the Honda power. Mercedes, not too bad. Lewis 322, George 319, and they were quick again in FP2 through the trap. We'll have a look at that in a second. Sergio Perez 321. Again, Red Bull obviously there or thereabouts. George 319. Williams not as quick as they would normally be, but not bad. 318 for Logan Sargent. But the Alpines very slow in a straight line, as were the McLarens in that opening session. And now you've probably seen these, but these were the results of that run in FP2 when the track was virtually dry, certainly in sector 1, a little bit damp offline, sectors 2 and 3, but enough to be able to put in some quick laps on the soft tire. Although note, I've said on the left, Ferrari and McLaren ran the mediums. Interesting that they did that, thinking ahead. Everybody else out on the soft, and Max, as I say, didn't really get a lap in anyway. But when he did that lap, that 19.3, it was about P4, and then it was quite early on, and then they put the car up on the stands, as I say. So there you can see the times. A lot of fun watching Fernando Alonso in the wet out there doing his thing. Really good. The two Aston Martins good in terms of balance and chuckability, drivability, and not slow in a straight line either. So looking like a good car. If it is going to be wet, Aston Martin look as if they'll be really quick, as do the two Mercedes. George 16.2, Lewis 16.9. A lot of traffic out there, and of course not many opportunities to get a lap in before the rain came. That should be borne in mind as well. Charles Leclerc 16.5, he definitely had a lot of traffic as well. Daniel Ricciardo looking good. Old Daniel Ricciardo, who loves Canada, goes really well here. He was complaining about the traffic. Everybody complaining about the traffic, blaming the Ferraris. Most teams blaming the Ferraris. Interesting. Yuki Tsunoda, again, there or thereabouts, 16.9. Alex Albon, not bad at all. Sergio Perez, round and round. Just, he's got his contract now through to... Quite sure if it's through to the end of 2025. It says through to 2026. Not quite sure what that means. Does that mean he gets involved in the 26 car, but he doesn't actually get to race it? Anyway, he's re-signed. As I said in various live streams, it's no surprise, really. I mean, he is a perfect counterpoint to Max, as we've always been saying. And he does bring a lot of money to the team, a lot of money through merchandising, but also he's got about 6 sponsors that are all generated out of Mexico as well. So he's not a paid driver. For sure he gets paid a retainer, don't get it wrong, but he does bring a lot of money to the team. So you make of that what you will. So anyway, he's staying, and he looked like sort of, I'm sorted now. It won't take any risks today, thank you very much. That was Sergio Perez. Esteban Ocon got in the car did a lot of laps. He did the most laps actually on the intermediates when it was wet towards the end, and not too bad in the dry either. Logan Sargent looking half reasonable. And the two McLarens, as I say, on medium tyres, not doing very much on the medium, but Oscar Piastri particularly, both of them look really good in the wet. I think it's worth saying at this point that if it was a dry weekend, dry Friday right through to Sunday, I've said already that I think it'll take Red Bull back to basically where we've seen them in the past. Very quick in a straight line by 3 or 4 kilometers, and using up that aero efficiency with a bit more downforce on the corners where they can get the turn in and the traction they need, and they'll be really good around Canada. But if it's wet, then not saying all bets are off, the Red Bull will still be a good car, but it'll certainly bring Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin much nearer to Red Bull. So it'll be a very, very close qualifying session if it is wet, in my opinion, and probably the most drivable cars will be the McLaren and possibly the Aston Martin. And then we had the speed trap in FP2 when there were proper runs for the first time, really, and you can see there the speeds are quicker through the trap. Max was last, didn't get into the 300s, but again, as I say, he had that problem. So again, we shouldn't read too much into this because we can't really tell there where Red Bull are, for example. But this does give some indication again of downforce they're running and speed through the air. Again, as I say, the Visa Cash App's really good through the air. Mercedes looking good. Look at Lewis Hamilton, 330. Kevin, right up there with Kevin Magnussen. I mean, that's an indication that Mercedes are pretty good now in terms of top speed versus grip and balance. And Lewis did quite a lot of laps on the intermediates at the end when it did start to rain. Looked pretty comfortable in the car. Looked just like Lewis Hamilton used to look in the wet. Looked really good, actually, I thought. Yuki Tsunoda up there as well. Lance Stroll, doing quite a lot for the Canadian fans. Looking pretty good. Obviously quick when the track was dry, and then two Astons good in a straight line, as I say, 328, 327. George Russell there, Guan Yu Zhou pretty quick in the Sauber. But Charles Leclerc 324, Carlos Sainz 319. Again, that kind of reflects not doing great laps in the dry. They had a lot of traffic. But I think we can say at this stage, McLaren are not as quick as, say, Mercedes or Aston Martin through the air in Canada. It may well change for tomorrow. As I say, most of the data that we got from today was pretty meaningless in the sense that it was just what was the track like when that lap was being recorded, what were the condition of the tyres, what was the traffic, there was maybe a couple of tows involved, maybe not, and there might be graining as well which affected the tyres. So can't read too much into it in terms of trends, can't read too much into it in terms of what we're going to see on Sunday. Of course, what we could see on Sunday is a race defined by the grid that will be in qualifying tomorrow. And if it's wet, obviously the pole suddenly takes on massive significance in terms of visibility and being able to get away, because the forecast is for rain through Saturday and Sunday. So it's a little bit like Monaco qualifying. The pole is going to be incredibly important, particularly going into that first section as well, because it's always very accident prone, that turn one, and then braking hard into the right hand of the change of direction. So you want to be at the front if you are a Charles Leclerc, a Max Verstappen, or one of the McLaren drivers, Carlos Sainz. So you want to be there, and so therefore qualifying is going to be really, really, if it is wet, it's going to be very spectacular tomorrow. Getting through into Q2 is going to be no mean feat because of the traffic as well and the visibility if they're out there, if it is wet. If it's dry, as I say, all bets are off, and we'll need to see what the setups are going to be like, and we'll be reporting obviously on that tomorrow in terms of top speeds and what everyone can do. But in the meantime, that was Friday. Not a lot to say, but some spectacular driving out there, curb hopping, sliding around. Not sort of wonderful power slides that you used to see in the wet, or we still hope we do see in the wet, but nonetheless some impressive driving, particularly with poor visibility. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. And we'll go to Canada. It's always a time for me when I always think of Gilles Villeneuve. The circuit's named after him, which is a great thing. And it's a time to remember Gilles. He would have loved the conditions today. I'm not sure he would have loved the cars today. I think he would have much rather been in a T3 or a T4 Ferrari with those sorts of conditions. But nonetheless, that's what it was. See you tomorrow.